Hi, this is the Peaceful Prepper. Welcome to part 2 in my series on emergency water for urban preppers beyond the 2-liter bottle. As always, I'm just sharing my thinking and my understanding. It's important to make your decisions based on your own research, especially about a topic as critical to survival as drinking water. So you live in an apartment, you want to store as much drinkable water as you think is adequate for the emergencies you anticipate might happen in your area, but it has to be within the physical constraints of your apartment. If you haven't given this much thought, check out my first video on water storage for urban preppers. I'll put a link below. Almost all emergency organizations like FEMA, the Red Cross, recommend at least 3 gallons of water for every member of your household. That's a 3-day supply of water for drinking and hygiene for each person. Don't forget to add in water for your animals. Now, what if the emergency situation lasts longer than your water holds out? It could be the emergency itself lasts longer than you expected. Or you just didn't have much space to store water to begin with. Or the amount of water you need per day turns out to be much more than you calculated for. There could be a heat wave and you need more water to stay hydrated than usual. People might be visiting when the emergency happens. Your mother, your brother and his family, one person, several people. That would really reduce the amount of time that your water would last. So there are circumstances when we'll need more water than we can store, or there can be circumstances. And if you live in an apartment, it's likely your water storage probably looks pretty much like this, maybe, with more bottles. And it probably doesn't look so much like this. I don't even know how big that container is, probably hundreds of gallons. So if we run out of our stored water, we're going to need to gather water from someplace and make it drinkable. I'm going to talk about water purification in a future video, but now I'm going to focus on some possible sources of additional water for urban preppers. The good news is that finding additional sources of water doesn't require any space in your apartment and usually doesn't require any specific gear. But it is important to think ahead, do some research, and in some cases practice or try things out. Typically, water is eventually trucked into emergency areas, but the timing, location, and the amount is unpredictable, and it's going to depend on the nature of the emergency. If you can provide for your own water needs, it gives you increased peace of mind. You're less of a drain on any emergency resources that are available, and you might be in a position to help others in your community. So it's win-win-win. I've been thinking about emergency water in terms of 3 levels, so I'm going to go through each one. Level 1 is regular drinking water. It's the water that you've stored and you've put aside, and also if you have warning in time before the water goes out, fill up any available container with tap water. Pots and pans, pitchers, your bathtub. There are products, I think there are a couple of different brands. It might be the Water Bob or Aqua Bob, something like that, that are like big plastic bags for your bathtub. And I think they're worth considering because they keep the water clean because it's enclosed within the plastic. I think they have little pumps that help you get the water out, but they also will, because it's in the plastic, prevent it from just going down the drain if you don't have a very tight drain. I personally don't think I would necessarily trust my bathtub to hold gallons and gallons of water over days and days without it seeping down the drain, and it'd be a shame to just lose water that you've put aside. Level 2, and I'm calling it collected water, is that range of it's drinkable, it's almost drinkable, it might need some purification. It includes things like water that you've stored but not rotated and you're wondering if there might be a little bacteria in it. Or water from your hot water heaters. That if you have a hot water heater with a tank, you you could have 30, 40, even 50 gallons of water that is drinkable. You know, the water that's coming out of your hot water heater is what's going into your pipes. Your toilet tank has water in it. Collecting rainwater is there. And I also have a little picture of a Silcock Key. And there are some videos on YouTube that talk about how to use, this is a tool that opens some, in commercial buildings or large buildings, opens the water pipes on the outside. I haven't tried it. I have no idea about the legality of it, but I did decide the tool itself is pretty inexpensive. I don't know, maybe $5 is what I paid for it, and I did decide to carry it in my bob. A couple of comments on level 2 water. First, water should be taken from the toilet tank, not the toilet bowl. The toilet tank is pretty clean water. The toilet bowl is not. Rainwater does need to be purified. If you have a rain barrel that catches water on a regular basis, that's great, and that could be a significant source of water. Even if you don't, during an emergency, you might be able to rig up something to collect some rainwater. There are some videos on YouTube that I've seen that use big plastic bags, guiding water into a bucket, or even an umbrella with holes in it. So it could be kind of a fun experiment if you think experiments like that are fun. Hot water tanks are considered drinkable water, because that is the water that just comes out of the hot water, the tap that has hot water for you. But it's important to first learn how to turn off incoming water, so if there is contaminated water out there, you're keeping it from going into the tank. It's a good idea to learn how to drain the tank before an emergency. I'm in the process of learning it for myself. It's not necessarily as easy as you think, and there's often sediment at the bottom of the tank which can clog up the drainage hole, especially if you have hard water, which I do. In a city, also, large buildings generally don't have individual tanks. There may be a big tank on your roof, somewhere else in the building, and depending on the situation, this is where you're going to have to just kind of respond to what exists for you. If the building manager is open to talking about it and thinking about, using the water tank in case of an emergency, great. If not, it might still be worth your while to learn whatever you can about that situation, because I think the more we can learn before an emergency, the best chance we have to be effective in an emergency. And water from your boiler is not the same thing as your hot water tank. And water in your boiler is not considered safe. And I don't know exactly what contaminants make that true, but when I've read things that they make that differentiation. Level 3 is gathered water. And that is really sources of water that you'll find in your neighborhood or somewhere in the city. Typically, these sources will be contaminated and need significant purification. So ponds, rivers, swimming pools. Now, if you're in the suburbs and you have your own swimming pool, that is a great source. But in the city, it's generally municipal pools. In my area, none of them are out in the open. You'd have to break into a building to get there, which I'm not recommending. But every place is different, and maybe in some other climates they're outside and there's some access to them. I have pictures of both the Charles River and Boston Harbor on this page. Now, salt water is generally not considered drinkable. It can be desalinated. Those purifiers, I believe, are really expensive, but certainly not impossible. But I think it's not the typical kind of purifier that I think we think about in terms of an emergency. And I pulled up pictures of the Charles River and Boston Harbor because just to emphasize the contamination of a lot of these sources in a city. If you've ever heard of the song Dirty Water, and I've forgotten who originally did it in, I think it might have even been in the 60s, but it's been covered by a lot of people. Well, that song is about the Charles River and Boston Harbor and how dirty the water is. And there were sort of decade projects of cleanups which were fairly successful, but large rivers and ponds in cities don't have a great reputation, and you really need to be careful. Some comments on the level 3 water. I think the most important thing to remember is this is the least desirable form of emergency water. It's likely to be the most contaminated and the hardest to make safe to drink. One of the things you want to do is anticipate which contaminants could be in the water. And remember, in an emergency, there could be flooding, more industrial waste, and sewage can be washed into the water, so take that into consideration. Make sure, if you're considering getting water from these sources, make sure you have the appropriate kinds of water purification and have some confidence that that purification will be effective. It's also worth thinking, how far away is the source? Are you thinking of walking or driving? And remembering, water is heavy. It's over 8 pounds per gallon. So if you want to gather some water that's a mile away and you're on foot, if you're trying to bring home 5 or 10 gallons of water, you're talking about 40 or 80 pounds. And water is also pretty cumbersome to carry, the way most containers are. I hope this has been helpful, especially for those of you in cities like me who are thinking about emergency sources of water. Stay tuned for part 3 in this series, where I'm going to be talking about water purification. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, consider subscribing. I really appreciate it. Thank you.